We can.
Okay. Hello and welcome to the new live session with /Data. I am Natasha Likar and I will be your host today. And we have a couple of things planned for you today. Have you ever wondered if working with developers is weird? Chris has, and I'm talking about Chris Heilmann, who's VP Developer Relations at WeAreDevelopers, and who will kick off our event with his presentation. And then for the main course, what are the main challenges in developer relations? We'll answer this and a lot more using the data from the 11th edition of the Developer Program Leaders Survey. The Developer Program Leaders Survey takes a look at how DevRel and developer marketing professionals run their developer programs and how they prioritize their work, how they justify the value of their developer program to senior management. Richard Muir, our very own data journalist and /Data, will walk us through the findings. These findings might surprise us, but will help us better understand the people between developers and the company, those in developer marketing, developer relations, and developer tooling positions. But I will tease you no more. I will let Richard enlighten us in a bit. Now, please check the chat on your side and your inbox. And after the event, check for a link to the Developer Program Leaders Survey, the 12th edition, and help shape the insights for the next session. The session is recorded and will be available on the /Data YouTube channel. There will be a Q&A session at the end of Rich's presentation, so you can post your questions anytime in the chat and we will get to them soon. Let us now welcome Chris on stage. And Chris, over to you.
All right, cool. Just started to write comments here. So let me share my screen and let me share my presentation. And I'm going to plow through that really quickly because we're going to have an hour of live talk. So it makes more sense to actually have more information and hopefully get some communication going here as well. I put these up on my blog today as well on christianheilmann.com. So if you basically just want to read them up with more information, you can do that there as well. Let me share my screen and hope everything goes right. Select one of those 6,000 things that I have open. There we go, PowerPoint. We go old school here. So you should be seeing my slides now. Hopefully that'll work so nobody can complain. And let's get started. So I'm Chris Heilmann. I'm VP of Developer Relations at WeAreDevelopers. I've been a DevRel advocate since 2009, starting in Yahoo, then working at Mozilla as the VP of DevRel there as well. Then I went to Microsoft in evangelism, and then I went to Microsoft as a tech product manager, working on developer tooling in the Chromium platform. And this is basically a few things that I want to remind us what developer relations are about and what we're actually giving back to the communities and giving back to the companies that we work for. So the first thing that I defined in 2009, and I defined that to get a new job. I was a lead developer. I couldn't get promoted anymore without getting into management, which I didn't want to do. So I invented the job title developer evangelist, and people asked me what it was. So I wrote a handbook and defined it. And I define it as a spokesperson, mediator, and translator between a company and its technical staff. Every day, millions of dollars are wasted in companies because tech people and non-tech people don't communicate. That's why you need people like us. You need people that worked on the product, know the frustrations of developers of the product, and want to do that better. That's part of the Developer Advocacy Handbook, which you can read at developeradvocacy.com for free. It's been updated since 2009, of course. I keep changing it, and I'm putting things in there, so there's more to come. Now, developer relations work internally and externally. And I think the internal thing is what a lot of people miss out on. And I think there is a lot of things that we need to do for our own company to actually get the right to be on stage, to be live on YouTube, to actually be out there and talk on behalf of our developers and our companies. So the internal work for us is actually optimize product documentation to outside needs. The first thing that every developer advocate should do is take out the product, try it out themselves, see where they get stuck, and ask people on the internet why they get stuck using a product. what kind of documentation is missing, what kind of videos are missing, what kind of code examples are missing. So these are the things that you should do, but not just because you can, but also based on data from the outside. You should also collect team questions and ideas, like what your team has to do, what they want to know from the outside world, and also what kind of technologies they're excited about, and they don't have time to actually learn themselves. It's your job to bring things to them that are cool from the outside, so they feel appreciated working in the company, and not just like, I'm doing product and you're doing the cool stuff out there. You have to find team frustrations and help work them out. That sometimes means that you communicate back to the company that they need to spend money on like licenses, that they need to spend money on allowing the engineers to re-architect the platform, for example, instead of just using a platform that's half-baked or really not effective. And that's something that you should do as well. You're a communicator between the developers and the company and the outside developers as well. And coach and mentor team members to be a voice for the company. The main thing that I did when I said I want to be developer evangelist is I wanted to have time to actually help my team grow as well. And everybody that I coached on public speaking and public appearances and blogging and writing became much better in the negotiations in the company itself when it came to job negotiations or being in meetings. And of course, find ways to keep the team excited about the product and working there. Because sometimes it's really frustrating when you see like all the cool people on the internet talking about really cool stuff, and you're just there basically going through your bug list every day and having to fix the same thing. So you have to find ways to get the team excited about the product that they do and show them what kind of impact it has to the outside world, their day-to-day job. And that way you get them more excited about staying in the company and being with the company. The external one is create product demand, like show the product to people and say like, hey, do you want to use it? What does it need for you to use it? Do you find developer needs? What do developers have what do they need to actually use your company's product or even care about your company? Which of course brings the explaining product to various audiences. You have to explain it differently to designers, differently to developers, differently to business people. So you have to be a person that is flexible in explaining technical products in the right way. You have to analyze the competition, see what the others are doing and learn from it, maybe copy it, maybe find other ways around it, see what frustrates the world about your competitor's product and make sure that you're actually not doing the same mistakes. And you have to find inspirational ideas out there. Like what are cool things that are happening that your team could be doing as well? What are other companies doing to keep their people happy? Can your company do it as well? Can you get budget for these kind of things? And find new talent for the company. That's the big thing. If you wrote good documentation, if you open source your software, then you actually have people that can get started in the company and get started quickly because they already know the product, they can hit the ground running. So getting any developer through the door is super expensive. So anything you can do to shortcut that and say like, I already vetted that person. Look, he already contributed to our product. We can hire that person. It's much easier than just saying like, okay, let's go to a job site and try to find people. And enable outside contribution and build communities. And this is where it gets really, really tough, where it's basically you have to get people to work with your product. You have to get people to actually, a community means that you're actually not just open sourcing a piece of software, but 90% of the time is actually working with that community, making them feel appreciated, vet their contributions and make sure that their contributions don't make more work for your engineering team. But actually, that's one of the big things where you can show growth and where you can show numbers to your company as well. The benefits for the company is something that I've been asked all the time. Like every time you talk about DevRel, it's like, why should a company do it? And it can feel like a boutique department. It can feel like something like, why should we have that? We got marketing, we got PR. Why do we need a developer relations team? And the biggest one is talent retention. Like internally, you keep the developers happy so they're not moving to another company, they're not moving your competitor, and you actually can keep the product running that you have. More maintainable products due to great documentation. By documenting the needs and wants from the outside world, it's also easier in the company to maintain the product because new engineers that get hired get the information instead of just hearsay or having to ask a lead engineer all the time for the information. They have documentation. And as developers, myself, I never have time to do documentation. So it's a very important thing that somebody can do that for me. You have a market fit product because you actually ask people what they want. This can also be done by user research, but oftentimes you don't get budget for user research. And also user research with developers can be really weird and frustrating because you hardly find the people that you want to have because they're busy developing. So when I worked on the Chromium developer tools, trying to do user research with that one was almost impossible because people just basically were happy with the way it was or completely unhappy. In between, there was not much feedback we got. And we have less knowledge attrition due to sharing of outside trends and products. So basically, the developers don't feel that they're actually falling behind because you're sharing information from the outside with them. So they don't feel frustrated doing the same bug fixing day to day and seeing like it could be better somewhere else, but it's up to you as well to tell them like, yeah, it looks like it, but here's what people working in that company had to say to me. Externally, it's of course product sales, like how many of the products were sold, how many subscriptions were sold. And that is basically when people trust your company even more as a technical resource. They go for subscriptions rather than just single products. Mindshare, getting the company out there in people's mind and saying like, hey, this has to do with the Vision Pro. Oh, this company did something similar before because I saw this great blog post, video, whatever from that company. And already knowledgeable applicants. People can hit the ground running because they already work with your product. They know about your company. They know what you expect, and they don't need like 3 months of onboarding before they actually get started. Talent acquisition, finding people for you is another big one, of course. And partner acquisition, like when you go to events and you talk to other people, speakers, DevRel people, salespeople at events, you probably find more partners that way. Oftentimes, I manage to get my company into other companies by talking developer to developer, not talking to manager or marketing team to marketing team. So oftentimes when I went to a conference, for example, I offered a brown bag the day after in a local company. And that way I got a contract for my company with that other third party, because otherwise they wouldn't have listened to us, but they were excited about my talk. Hey, I can come to your office and give you a talk as well. Why not? So we had a few good fat years, like the whole DevRel thing was booming. Everybody was hiring lots and lots of DevRel people. People understood the value of developer relations. But the problem was that it became too much of a thing to have a developer relations department and not like find developer advocates or support people in the company, become developer advocates and talk in the outside world. It was more or less becoming a marketing-y thing or a salesy thing. Like we had people that got hired as developer advocates and changed company every month. That cannot work. You cannot have an impact because you don't know the product. You haven't heard the pain points of the developers. You don't know what the issue is with creating these new features. You need to know the product before you actually can get out to the world and talk to them about it. But even in those fat years, things were kind of weird because developers are a really hard audience to sell to. Talent retention, for example, was a great idea, but when the market was completely open and like lots of people hired and everybody looked at the salaries that the big ones gave out there, people jumped job every few months. In America, that was a big thing that I met with people. Basically, they doubled their salary by going to 3 different companies within 1 year. In Europe, it's not that easy because we got work laws and it's really harder to get hired again and leave a company that quickly and leave everything behind. But it was really hard to sell the idea of talent retention to your company when the engineers were just jumping from company to company just to make more money. In Microsoft, there was a thing where basically you weren't promoted, you left the company, got hired by another department, then you got your promotion. That's how broken the system kind of was when it was booming that much. The product subscription sales in a world where people want everything free. A lot of people went into the developer market because it was kind of a gold mine, and everybody started making developer products, and all of them were VC funded. So they spent the first year basically giving people services for free, everything for free, and burning the VC money. And it's really hard when you work for a company that actually has to make money with it to actually find that kind of try to challenge that and make it better. And basically say like, okay, we cost, but here's our EULA, it's actually always available, these kind of things. But a lot of times people just want to get something free, use it and discard it. So it's really hard to get that long-term sale in there to basically get your sales team to work with you to get subscriptions. And the bigger you are, the fewer available outside contributions you get. That was always my biggest issue. In Microsoft, everything that I did was I released it open source. And I always had to explain to the company why. And I said, like, because if I'm gone tomorrow, the thing will move on. Also, people can start contributing, and that way we can hire people who already know the product and the whole spiel that we talked about earlier. The problem was that when you're Microsoft, nobody contributes because they expect you to have thousands of developers on your beck and call that can do the thing that are probably better than them. So it really needed a lot of coercing the community to understand that we only have 3 people on that product as well, and every outside contribution is valued. But a lot of people don't contribute because, first of all, they feel inferior to the people that got hired by a large corporation, or they actually realize this is one of the most expensive companies in the world. Why should I do things for free for them? So when you promised a company that you're going to create a community out there, that you're going to get contributors and no contributors come in, that was a big issue as well. And I found the whole blossoming of the developer relations thing kind of a danger sign. When all you meet at events, like speaker dinners, are DevRel people that are only in the company for half a year, and nobody from the company, no company founders, no company developers that work in the company, it felt like we're creating a parallel world to the developer world again. And that is what when I started with the developer evangelism thing, that's what I wanted to avoid. I went to events and only saw salespeople or marketing people. I didn't meet any engineers on stage. And I want that to be a thing. And that's what developer evangelism to me was always about. The other problem was actually that companies hired the loudest people on social media, like when the whole social media thing boomed. And then I remember like Microsoft hiring like 50 people in 1 month. And then like 3 months later, 40 of them were gone again because they didn't deliver anything that the company needed. They were just loud and important on social media. And that does not necessarily convert to sales or convert to happier developers in the company. And developer relations became a role hired from the outside, not found and nurtured in the company. And I think that's something that we now should be considering going back to. Because if you think about it, the market has changed immensely. Right now, everybody is sacking people. There's not that many jobs out there. A lot of people are worried about AI taking over their job, although that's kind of nonsense. But the thing is, all of the things that we told the company that DevRel can do is actually not that important anymore. Talent retention? Fine, go. There's enough people out there because the market, the big ones are not hiring at the moment. Everybody's looking for a job. More maintainable products. Okay, the product is good, but with the team that we have right now, we can maintain that product easily. The only thing is that still working is that market fit product. Like how do we change the product in a market where everybody talks about AI and flying cars again? And the knowledge attrition is also because the teams are much, much smaller because we also sack people. It's actually not that important to have a DevRel person for that. It's not surprising that when the cuts happened, a lot of like developer relations people were let go as the first ones because the other ones are really writing code and doing things for the company. Externally, the product sales and subscription sales at Mindshare are still a thing, but the knowledgeable applicants are not that interesting because most companies are not hiring at the moment. The talent acquisition as well, not partner acquisition, might be still a thing. So we're living in a humbler world because that bubble burst where we just needed to hire people every 2 months, and it was very important to get social media excited about your company. Salaries are still much larger than elsewhere, but companies actually ask more, what can you do for the company to get that salary, rather than like, I'm trying to match the Metas and the Googles so you stay in the company. So these things are dwindling down, so that's quite interesting to see. But job safety and the structure of your jobs is still pretty terrible. Most companies I worked for have no idea how to actually maintain somebody for 20 years or maintain somebody that out of a sudden has a wife and has children or needs to tend to his parents. Like all the things that we need to do or all the legal requirements we have to have as employees in countries. And I moved back to Germany where everything is like really, really strict. That's what a lot of companies, IT companies, have no idea how they're doing it because they've been just saying, okay, we give people enough money, it's their problem to deal with these kind of things. So that's an interesting thing to look at right now. What kind of safety, what kind of security does the company give me rather than how much money does that company give me? There's still a huge need for developers, especially maintenance developers of like products that have been around for decades. This is not interesting. This is not fascinating for new engineers, but it's a good idea for somebody who's already bored of having to run around and invent something new every few weeks. But their software is running the world. A lot of software is breaking apart at the seams right now. And our job as developer relations people is to be there to make this world work for developers and the companies as well. We're not in a bubble anymore. We're actually facing the same problem as like traditional companies do right now. So maybe it's time for us as developer relations people to be the advocate for the developers and actually help the companies build a more maintainable future for people rather than just one that just burns money and is super exciting every day. So there's a few focus areas that I want us to think about. Fixing the gap between job offers and CVs. It's frustrating that you get CVs that actually are unreadable. I mean, when I worked at Microsoft, I got like 1,700 a month, and I have no time to look through your animated scrolly thing. I just want to have the information. And when a job offer has like 3-year experience in a 1-year-old technology, then something went wrong as well. So I think that's something where we can focus on and make sure that the company stands out by having really good job offers out there. Bringing structure and safety to developer careers, like can you go in 5 years? It's almost a cliche when people ask you what you're going to do in 5 years, but the company should have a good answer saying like, in 5 years, we expect you to do this and we empower you to do this by giving you that. Finding measurable data to define developer worth to the company. And it's not lines of code. When Elon Musk took over Twitter and was basically saying like, show me how much code you've written, I just basically bumped my head on the table because it's the most stupid thing you can actually ask for people. Lines of code doesn't make a difference. The same way actually saying more words in a song doesn't make it a better song. It's about the message. It's about how it performs and what kind of effect it has on people. And try to make retention and staying in a company a good thing and not a sign that you slowed down. When I left Microsoft, I was there for 8 years. And a lot of people, especially startups, were like, oh, you were there for 8 years, so your knowledge is completely outdated. And you're like, you're actually using 3 of the products that I wrote in Microsoft and maintained in Microsoft. So it's not that I sat there for 8 years and said, like, I'm not going to do anything anymore. So the whole like being in hamster wheel of having to reinvent yourself over and over again is something that we might have to actually change because it's just not maintainable the way it is right now. And that's all I had. So I'm Chris Heilmann. You can see me at christianheilmann.com or at WeAreDevelopers.com. And I'm Gmail at christianheilmann.com is my email, and CodePoet on X or Twitter, as I keep calling it. And that's all I had. So I thank you very much. And we can go on with the event.
Thank you, Chris. This was really, really great. If you have any questions for Chris, please do add them in the chat. And Chris, we'll see you in a bit during the Q&A session. And now for Richard. Richard, hi. Bring us the data.
Hey, thank you, Natasha. And thank you very much, Chris, for these interesting insights from like within the organizations. I find them really useful because my role as an analyst, I see from the outside looking in, and it's really interesting to get your perspective. So thank you. And I also noticed a lot of parallels in what we're going to talk about today. So if you have any questions, please put them in the chat as we go, and I'll pick them up at the end. So today I'm going to talk to you about the main challenges faced in developer relations. And these insights come from our Developer Program Leaders Survey. So /data, we survey software developers, and this gives us one view of the industry. But we also think it's important to see the other side of the coin. And so because of this, we have the Developer Program Leaders Survey that asks professionals such as yourselves about their experiences. What we're going to do today is look at the data from the Q3 2023 survey wave. You can also answer our current open DevRel survey and get access to insights as a result. If you're not familiar with /data, our mission is to understand developers, who they are, what they buy, and where they're going. We do this through running 2 surveys per year. We've just closed our 26th global wave. This is 25, but the 26th is very, very recently closed. We do this by looking at many different development areas, reaching developers in over 150 countries as well. So that is a very brief introduction to /data and what we do. Now I'd just like to kind of set the scene and tell you what I'm going to talk to you about today. We're going to discuss 5 different topics. First of all, we'll look at how developer relations practitioners spend their time, then what challenges you're facing, how the challenges will evolve over the coming years, how we might reduce the impact of these challenges, and how we can make it easier to justify developer relations efforts. Often we find that DevRel is a footnote when it shouldn't be. It's actually a very important part of any developer-facing organization and needs to be easily justified. So most of the data I'll be presenting today comes from our Developer Program Leaders Survey. And one of the questions we asked is, how do you spend your time? What are the most important activities that you do every day? And we saw that key activities such as strategizing, content production, maintaining developer portals, and creating tech demos. But before we look at these most important ones, let's just take a look at the least important ones. We can see that, thankfully, at the bottom, these somewhat low-value activities like SEO, like consolidating resources and creating internal buy-in for the developer program, thankfully, these low-value resources don't take up much budget, time, or effort. Just 6% of the respondents to this selected these options. We will return to look at creating internal buy-in for the developer program later. But I want you to keep that in mind for now. We're going to go a little bit off piste and then come back to this very shortly. But first, here's some good news. SEO and consolidating resources are both activities which do not take up much time, budget, or effort. When we look at the most important activities, we can see that there's 4 that dominate, selected by around a third or more of respondents. And actually, these activities show a really good balance between strategy and direct action. It's important to make a strategy, but there's no use in just making a strategy. You have to work towards it. And so we see that the kind of dominant, more active things here are marketing, content production, creating and maintaining developer portals, and creating tech demos. And it might be that we're seeing that due to budget cuts, these dominant activities are actually ones that facilitate low cost and one-to-many engagement, particularly for marketing content and developer portals. This is a way that your efforts can impact many different developers at once. And the question I want to pose here is, does low cost always equal low value? Now, the direct developer engagement, which was selected by 17%, or organizing developer events, this is a much closer touch point for developers. And it's important to think about the ROI here. When you spend this time making marketing content and creating these developer portals, yes, they're important because of how many developers they touch, but how much value is it bringing to those developers? I'm not saying I have the answer to this, but I think it's an interesting question to think about. And we know that developers have pretty high expectations and pretty high standards for what they require. And we also know that to do this requires extensive effort and budget. And here, this chart shows when we're making developer resources. So in the previous chart, we looked at these kind of more internal activities, whereas these are what I would term external activities, creating the conferences and documentation and things that developers will consume as part of their day-to-day. So as well as meeting the internal expectations, developer relations has to consider developers' needs and focus on building and maintaining these developer-focused resources. And what we see, first of all, is there is, by and large, fairly strong agreement between the budget and the effort that is spent. However, it's not always the case, particularly for conferences and trade shows where the budget far outstrips the effort, and the information via newsletters, blogs, and social media, and sample code where we see the inverse. But I want to take a closer look at conferences, because this is the most important in terms of budget and the 4th most important in terms of effort. And these priorities don't always align with developers' expectations. In fact, to developers, conferences and trade shows are often very far down the list of priorities. Maybe, we see single-digit percent, maybe even 12% of developers value conferences and trade shows. And so here we see this disproportionate allocation of resources within DevRel. Now, we know that conferences and trade shows have wider benefits beyond just satisfying developers. It adds to the brand image, and it helps in acquisition and in other ways as well. And so this is why, when doing these activities, we have to think not just about the impact on developers, but also the broader impact too. And working with community is another aspect here. This is a very similar story where the effort and budget spent on maintaining and creating a developer community doesn't always match the importance to developers. In fact, it often outstrips the importance. We see that 17% of developers think that a community is one of the top 5 most important resources that vendors should offer to support them. And this comes from our Q1 2023 Developer Nation survey. And when we look at the more important resources, we see documentation and sample code selected by 30, sometimes 40, even 50% of professionals would select that. Community is therefore not vital for developers, but it does serve a purpose. And when we ask developers what are the most important factors they consider when joining a technology-centric community, the data reveals that developers engage with these communities in order to learn. It's the quality of information is by far the most important factor. Over half of developers selected this as as the primary reasons why they would join a technology-centric community. And that's considerably more than the next most important factor, the availability of courses and training, which is 38%. But incidentally, this also facilitates learning and knowledge sharing. So when we go back to see this amount of money and time spent on facilitating and creating community, is this spent in a way that matches developers' expectations? Is the budget and effort being spent on community being spent on things that will help developers to learn? And as with conferences, we know that community brings bigger benefits as well. It's not just to satisfy developers. And in fact, community increases engagement. It creates a sticky audience, and as well as a knowledge sharing network. And this is why we see that it's a key part of strategy for 85% of developer relations professionals. And in fact, for nearly 3 in 10, it's the most important part. But when we look at the benefits that community brings to organizations, as well as to developers, one particular aspect appears in the center of this Venn diagram, and that is as a knowledge sharing network. Developers access communities in order to learn. And for vendors and software companies, having an unpaid team of experts, let's say, is really, really useful. You have people that can help new members integrate into the community. You have resources that people can search. And so actually building a community focused around knowledge sharing is something that is very beneficial to organizations and developers alike. So we know that community, though not the most important to developers, is still certainly important. It's important to organizations, but this importance brings its own set of challenges. Now, when we asked developer relations professionals what were their biggest challenges, community stood out at the top. Nearly 4 in 10 selected keeping existing community members engaged, and nearly a third selected growing our community. And we saw that 57% of respondents selected either of these 2 options. And this shows that community challenges pervade throughout developer relations. Interestingly, though, just 12% selected both. And what this tells me is it says that developer relations professionals are focused either on growing their communities or on maintaining engagement. Now, I'm going to quickly diverge again to look at some more developer-focused data. We will return to these challenges very shortly. But in our State of the Developer Nation report, for which I hope a link is appearing in the chat very soon, this is a free report that we release to the public. We did a deep dive into community engagement. I've shown you one chart from this section before. We also asked developers what encourages them to actively participate in a community. And one big difference here is we can see there is no single factor that dominates the rest, as we saw what makes developers choose a technology-centric community. We saw that the quality of information was by far the most important. When developers are engaging with the community, there's actually many, many different reasons they choose. And I've chopped off the bottom 5 here just to keep it in. And we see that a well-designed platform encourages the developers the most, but it's actually not that far ahead. And what we actually see is when you look at the impact that you as developer relations practitioners can have on the community, actually developers want to see you engage. This regular effort is well placed. 27% selected regular updates. We have prizes and rewards, a well-defined purpose. Culture is very important to developers. They also want projects they can work on together, fun activities. Active moderation, still not so popular, but it's up there too. And so this means that when you're putting your effort into the community, the developers actually value this close relationship, these close touch points. And we can see this. They want to see the regular updates. They want to see the community have purpose and to have a welcoming culture. So this feels like a way that developer relations can really align the purpose of a community with developers themselves. Developers use communities primarily to learn, and by facilitating that and staying active, you can encourage them to participate more and hopefully reduce some of the top two challenges that DevRel professionals face. So moving on to the other challenges, the next ones in the list are very familiar to all of us. The challenges of growing user base and unfortunately of justifying the existence of DevRel. I said I would come back to this earlier. And these are the next three most salient challenges: the defining metrics and justifying budget. And in fact, there appears to be somewhat of a data gap. We see that actually people find it harder to define the KPIs than they do to actually achieve them. 16% selected this option. And very interestingly as well, Chris, I know you mentioned this in your talk about hiring and retention and keeping people involved, is that our data shows that actually the employee retention, hiring new DevRel professionals and dealing with headcount cuts are actually some of the least salient challenges that people are facing. Now, it may be that at the time this data was collected, which was Q4 2023, the impact of budget cuts had not yet been felt, as we're seeing, 17% dealing with budget cuts here, and maybe your experience differs from this. But I think it's just important to recognize that it's actually these community challenges, as well as the attracting new users and justifying the DevRel budget, that are the most salient challenges by and large. And just 4% selected no challenges. We know this is a challenging discipline to work in. And even considering this, many DevRel practitioners expect the situation to worsen. We asked in this survey as well, how do you expect your FTE headcount, your budget, and the number of products supported to change from 2023 to 2024? And we saw that the majority expected the budget to either stay the same or decrease, while the number of products would increase. And this points to a tightening of the purse strings, but also a tightening of the belts in developer relations. In short, this chart says that many people will be expected to do more with less. And when we're already struggling to justify the budget of developer relations, it actually means that the data to do so is never been more important. And we see that very few respondents use a calculated dollar gain. The quantitative data is heavily used. We asked respondents, how do you justify your developer program? And we can see that 10% selected with a calculated dollar gain in direct revenue, 20% selected this as an indirect contribution, but a whopping 45%, that's nearly half of respondents, said they use non-financial quantitative arguments, like the number of new onboarded developers, for example. And so this points to a knowledge gap in translating the value of an onboarded developer into the bottom line. Now, we know that attracting developers to use our products is very important. And we can see that because of this, there is a gap in people understanding just how important. And we see that there's also a fair number that are struggling to find the right arguments, and they see that the benefit of the program is taken for granted. And just one point before I move on is you might well notice that these numbers do not sum to 100, and that's because this is a multiple choice question. So we know there's a small data gap here. Very, very few people understand the calculated dollar gain, but we're actually trying to use quantitative arguments to justify the existence of developer relations. But the range of metrics and KPIs that are used is huge. They're a useful proxy to measuring success, but through necessity, different disciplines rely on different KPIs. And in this chart, the data underlying asks, what KPIs or metrics do you use? And we can see that those in dev marketing use vastly different KPIs to those in dev relations, who still, again, use vastly different KPIs from dev tooling. I'm not going to dive deeply into this data to talk about the individual points. It's more the shape of this data that I want you to concentrate on. I've sorted it by dev marketing, and we can see that what is popular in dev marketing, like ad analytics, not necessarily so in dev relations or dev tooling. The same as in dev tooling, SDK downloads, the most important KPI for this discipline, but barely registers for those in dev marketing. So this data landscape is confusing. Okay, a direct dollar gain. Everybody understands dollars, right? If you're adding a developer, you want to know how much they add to your bottom line. And quantitative arguments are just a proxy for this. And this, to me, I think it stands out as one of the challenges that we're facing here, is in addition to measuring the community engagement and attracting developers here, is how do we go a step further and say that when we add a new member to our community, how much value do they bring? So that brings me to the end of this presentation. I just wanted to take a quick moment to recap and to inform you about some of the work that Splash Data has done in order to try and understand this situation. So first of all, to recap, we know from the data that developer relations practitioners are busy. You have a wide range of internal and external facing responsibilities. We also know that building and maintaining a developer community is key strategic aim for most of you, but also creates some of the biggest challenges. And some of these challenges are, in fact, making a community align with developers' expectations. And as a little tip, you can do this by making sure your community facilitates learning. Another challenge of DevRel is proving the impact. And we know that measuring lifetime value is hard. And because of this, DevRel practitioners use a range of proxy data points, which give you a view of success, but don't quantify it as well as you could. We're trying to understand this landscape and understand this concept. And we've done some research and released a white paper recently about developer engagement value. And this is a metric that takes a variety of behaviors into account and can help you to quantify the impact of your community engagement. I'll give you a brief overview of this. It was our Director of Research, Christina Voskoglu, who came up with this methodology, and we have a white paper which you can read today. And we have this developer engagement value, and we do not want to put dollar amounts on this, but we want to provide an index to help you understand which activities increase the value of an onboarded developer and which will decrease. And so different behaviors for developers have different impacts. Some are usage inducing, such as the supporter and skill builder value, peer influencers, decision makers, developer referrers, and some are product enhancing, like the value you get from a developer giving feedback, or the value you get from a developer who contributes to your open source software. And so that brings me to the end of this presentation. We have our developer relations survey open, I believe. We also have lots of resources available at devrelx.com and lots of data available for you at /data.co. Before I end, I would like to say a big thank you to our community partners, Common Room and Devacate. And I would like to leave you with this question of how can you turn knowledge that you already have into wisdom that helps you unlock developer-led growth? Thank you.
Thank you so much for sharing, Rich. I think we can bring on Chris to the stage as well, so we can start the Q&A bit of the session. So, Rich, I had a first question for you that came in was, how should DevRel professionals adjust their community engagement strategy by region?
Thank you, Natasha. Yeah, that is, one of the data points I didn't show, because we collect a lot of data in this developer program leaders survey, is the impact on regional strategy. And our research shows that developers have very different profiles by regions, very different, it's one of the first things I look at when I'm trying to understand what is driving developers' behavior, because there's so much cultural context from a regional point of view. And looking at, say, East Asia, for example, we see that a third of developers value prizes and rewards when having community participation, but in Western and Eastern Europe, it's just 17%. However, in Western Eastern Europe, it's the culture and a well-designed platform that's really important. This is, there's so many different nuances by region that actually tailoring your developer support strategy by region is super important. And this goes to community focus as well. But yeah, the biggest differences here are that inclusive culture is much more important in Western and Eastern Europe than in East Asia. But it's the community platform that is more important as well. Whereas in East Asia, we see prizes and rewards actually one of the most important things.
Wonderful. Thank you. Chris, do you have anything to add perhaps to this question based on your experience?
Yeah, I can see the same thing. I think it's kind of sad that in Western and Eastern Europe, the whole inclusion thing and making sure you make it for everybody is a bigger topic. But I think it's also a matter of like how much you see yourself as a developer. Are you a delivering person in a company, or are you actually also the outside like hustle developer that has things on the outside that wants to be seen as like an independent developer as well? I see the same in like when I talk to people in enterprise environments, they're basically getting a prize or something is actually more important to them as like saying like, okay, you're now part of a community. And he's like, I don't have time to be a big part of a community and do a lot of stuff, but I'm actually happy to contribute my knowledge and other people can then learn from that. And I think it's also interesting with the how some platforms that have been like the platform to go to have been losing people continuously when the culture aspect wasn't that good. When, for example, the moderation bit didn't work out and people left these platforms and then actually tried to find other solutions. And I think that's an interesting point to see where you can lead the community and how the community just wants to show off to each other who actually is the coolest because they won a prize or they actually reached the next level as a contributor to a community. And I think that's partly also how many developers are in those regions and how many people there are to compete with. Like when you're one of thousands that actually are on the same level as developers because you're in a place where other companies outsource to, then actually your contributions are a feather in your cap. Whereas like if you are in a place where you want to be the cool outside developer and then the expert, then basically getting a prize and then going over here and doing your own thing again is the thing that drives you more. It's interesting though, is also the question is like, how much do we do on local translations? That's something that I don't know if you collected data on that. That would be something that interests me. I saw this an internet-wide thing that basically showed that like 60% of websites out there that are not in English were machine translated and are actually garbage. And nobody complains about it because it's actually just a thing that people do to say, oh, we're available in 20 different languages. And I find that hilarious with a lot of like AI, LLM things like, oh, this one supports 180 languages. And you're like, yeah, and how much time did you have to validate that and actually test if that documentation in that language actually makes sense or doesn't make any sense? I had it with even with Microsoft when we did the automatic translation to German of our content, and I proofread that, and I'm like, this made no sense whatsoever. And even when languages are as close as English and German, it doesn't work machine translated. So it's a matter of like, does it make sense to actually localize your materials? I mean, Paul Kinlan is in the chat here, and yesterday they announced that web.dev is now available in Chinese as well. And that, I think, is not machine translated. So it would be interesting to see if that gives them a big boost to be able to get the audience in that market to use it more, because it's not frustrating to see a localized version that makes no sense.
Yes, indeed. Chris, we also had a few questions for you in the chat around first time getting into developer advocacy. So I was wondering if you want to expand on that a little bit, like on the question.
I think the question was if you need to be a developer to actually, or if you need to know how to code to be a developer advocate. And I mean, this sounds like gatekeeping, but I think yes. And it's basically because you need to know the pain of developers and you need to know the problems of developers to actually have empathy for them. Like if you basically are a person that is, you're a people person, or you're just saying like, oh, I can actually I can mentor anybody. But being a developer has a lot of frustrations over the years. I mean, we've always been seen as these people that are not social, that you can't talk to. That's why people didn't talk to us, and that was like a self-fulfilling prophecy. And also the dealing with like demands that make no sense and having to still deliver them is something that I think you have to have experienced as a developer evangelist or developer advocate, because otherwise you will not be able to stand. When I sold myself as a developer evangelist in Yahoo, I basically said, I'm going to be from now on in these meetings where the decisions are being made that actually make our life hell as developers. And if you are not a developer or you haven't been a developer, then you don't know which of these decisions are. Then you don't actually know what to communicate back to the company, what they should change or what problems they should fix. So I think an affinity to technology for sure, but experience and especially product production, like delivering real software in an environment, is super important to actually be good, to be a good developer advocate, because you have to know the pains of people to be able to actually communicate with them.
Thanks, Chris. I appreciate the insights. We have one more question for Rich regarding the data presented. How else could we demonstrate value to developers through community?
Thank you, Natasha. Yeah, I am. The main takeaway I thought from this my particular piece on community is that developers use it for learning, and when we look at those who don't use it for learning, what we saw is that actually for these developers, it's more about the networking. This is the secondary reason why developers will access a community, and we see this is much more common amongst younger developers. It's basically early career developers are using community as a way to build their network and as a stepping stone. So for them, it serves this dual purpose of you have it as a knowledge repository, but it's also a way to build their network and to kind of, maybe find jobs, maybe find mentorships through there. And this has created what I think is a really interesting gap in the community, is that you have a real need for expert community members, because these are the people who are building the knowledge base. These are the people who are answering questions. And often these are the people who will be doing the mentoring. But the real question is, how do you attract these experts into the community? And that, I think, is one of the biggest challenges that we have here. This is something that we looked at in the SON, but it was hard to pin down exactly. The SON is the State of the Developer Nation report, but it's hard to pin down exactly how to get these expert developers in. It's first of all, they're there to learn too. So this knowledge base becomes a self-fulfilling prophecy. Is if you have a good knowledge base, you attract the experts because they want to use it and they want to contribute to it. But we also see that amongst all the developers and those with more experience, they want to be able to have in-person events and also invite their peers and friends. So for them, it more becomes about having a support network rather than a professional network. And so I think it's, making sure, I want to try and sum this up into a nutshell because I tend to ramble sometimes. And it's more about making sure that these one-on-one intra-community interactions are fulfilling and useful to people. And that is what will lead to the good stuff. That's what will lead to this community as a knowledge base, is when you can facilitate meaningful interactions between community members. I think that's why developers come to communities.
Wonderful. And kind of a tangential question here as well is, like, you talked about community being one of the biggest challenges. What are some good strategies for building community? I think Chris can also add his 2 cents here as well.
Yeah, I'll be very brief, Chris. I think you probably have more experience of direct experience in this space than I do. But I think the good strategies that I can see from looking at the data is that developers value this one-to-one connection. They value quality connections. And I think is, building a few quality one-on-one connections with developers, targeting the ones that picking your evangelists, choosing your evangelists, being very strategic about let's say your founding community members. This is how you get this head of steam. And this is what attracts other people to a community as well. Chris, I think maybe you probably have something to add here as well.
There's some technical bits that are actually important, and there's some bits that actually are very human. So I think, for example, when you have a code base that you actually, an open source code base or a product, and you actually have like beginner bugs to actually for people to fill out and actually make contribution as easy as possible. And then when people start contributing, to put a face on these people and openly in the community say like, I don't know, Jessica has fixed 3 bugs in the documentation, and she shows that it's actually possible to have a great impact for that. We thank her very much for that, and actually point out that there are people behind the contributions, and that way you can entice other people to actually come out of their shell as well. I think that's a really important bit. And the other bit is like, make sure that you're actually building on existing platforms. A lot of companies say like, okay, we got to have a community, so let's make our own software that people have to sign up for with an OAuth and a 2-factor authentication, and we need their mobile phone, and we need them to know you already lost them. Make sure that people can actually log in with as many things as possible, that they actually already have information in. Make sure that they actually, when they have a profile somewhere, they can pull in the data from that profile, because I don't want to type in my bio and upload a picture in like 10 different systems just to join a community, because these things will be outdated, and then like in 3 years time, it's embarrassing to see all these old things out there. So make sure that people can actually take their online persona or what they maintain online, where they are, to your community, rather than just like asking them to sign up and become part of that one, because there's thousands of companies asking us to become part of their community, and they all call themselves a family, and it's hard enough to deal with your own family. So there's an overwhelming aspect to that as well. The other bit about getting like experts in is actually make sure that you actually sort out their time. That basically you say like, okay, I've got people in, and you collect questions from the community members, and then you have like one day where that person answers something with you. And instead of just getting like emails from everybody, an expert has not much time on their hands. So it makes sure that you're doing all the admin around the questions from your audience for that person. And then they can actually spend half an hour answering all of them, and you can actually post on their behalf if necessary as well. So that's the one-on-one connection is important, but also one-on-one connections don't scale if you're actually an expert and you get asked to help with a community out there as well. And in general, I think it's a matter of like also telling people that moderation help is wanted, admin help is wanted, like making sure that the community is not just experts, and lowering that barrier to entry, that people don't feel intimidated by your community, is something to make it grow rather quickly as well. And also like good moderators, good community people, like if somebody answers and oh, that's just stupid, and you're like, no, it's not stupid, it was just a very beginner question. It's just basically, we don't tolerate that kind of like immediate bashing of people here, to basically point out that the community is there for you to learn something, but also to learn how to be a better person with other people, because in the end you will work in a team. For example, when I hired people, I looked at their GitHub profiles, but I didn't look at what their code was doing. I was actually more interested how they deal with pull requests, how they deal with issues, how they deal with communicating with other people. And there I actually saw a lot of people that can help me with my product as well, and see how they fit into the whole thing. So making people understand that their social aspect of how they appear online is also very important, to see if they can get hired later on, or if they actually are seen as like, yeah, technical expert, but oh, I'm not going to go there because that's like a minefield to hire.
Thank you. Thank you, Chris, for sharing your perspective. Thank you, Richard, for sharing this wealth of data. And that's all, folks, for now. Thank you for joining us, and I hope you found the answers you were looking for. If you didn't, that's what we're here for. SlashData has been researching developers for more than 17 years. We track developer behaviors and preferences across 11 plus development areas. You can find out more about our research and lots of free valuable resources at slashdata.co. And we will see you all soon. Bye.
Bye-bye.
Thank you. Goodbye.